Okay, this is another by request video. One of you, it might have been over in the members section, but one of you asked if I would do a video about books that I would recommend for parents. And if I'm understanding you correctly in that request, books that would help guide you navigating the world, raising your children, that sort of thing. That's how I took it. Hopefully I'm right on that. But I've assembled 10 books that I think are valuable for that. And let me make this clear up front. There's probably a lot more. This is, again, one of those things, anytime I do one of these top 10 lists, understand that this obviously comes from my personal bias and my personal library, which is extensive, I will say, but I don't have every book out there. So always open to suggestions, but I'm probably nearing the end on what my cranial hard drive can hold. So anyway, so let's jump right in. So these are not necessarily books I'd recommend you sit down with your children and, hey, kids, here's Toxic Sludge is good for you. Read along. This is more to help fortify you raising children. And really, even if you're not a parent, just this is, to me, good, solid information for you personally, but especially if you have children and you want to fortify your children against a lot of the psychological and spiritual and physical pitfalls out there. So starting right off, we'll just jump right into the propaganda end of it. Toxic Sludge is good for you, and trust us, we're experts. Now, I've reviewed these before, so I'm not going to get into this too far. And again, those of you that want a full, proper review, I'll put some things like this at the on the end screen, so check that out. But both of these books are a breakdown of the public relations industry and how that works to influence human behavior. And one of the things, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know I am radically anti-broadcast television. And so I have a very love-hate relationship even with YouTube, because I feel like there's so much of broadcast media is designed for autocratic control. And anyway, both these books are good for understanding the way media works, and more specifically, the way public relations works. So a lot of case studies in both of these about how public relations companies have been used to start wars, have been used to sway public opinion against popular products or even popular types of packaging. And when you read some of this material, you start to see how much your own behavior has been influenced by some of these things. The Trust Us, We're Experts, definitely a lot of very good, relevant stuff in this to a lot of the current medical things of the trust the science kind of thing. This dispels a lot of that, and sadly, I think both of these books are definitely written from a more left-leaning perspective, and I doubt these guys would rewrite these books now. So enjoy them for the time capsule they are. Now, moving right along, kind of in that same vein, this is a fiction book, and this is one you can actually read to your children. This is called Children's Story, The Children's Story by James Clavell. I think I'm saying his name right. And this is an excellent book that is a story of how propaganda works, especially with children. And it's told in a story fashion, very simple, quick read. I actually think I read this out loud to my girls a couple of years ago. And I originally read this as part of our English curriculum in 9th grade. And I remember it stuck with me. I mean, that's been almost 40 years ago. And this book stuck with me because it's all about allegedly a communist or Soviet invasion of the United States. And some of that is a little, obviously a product of the time. There's a lot of the way it's very Red Dawn-esque in the way that's depicted, but it's all told, if from the perspective of this little boy in the classroom. And when his teacher is taken away by this new occupying force, the occupying government, and this new prettier teacher is put in place to brainwash the children. And she does so exceedingly fast. And the way it's presented, the way is a really good food for thought and really good to get your children thinking about how this stuff works. And this is definitely one of those that's a really good discussion starter, especially if you have teenage children, to get them to think about the way they process information. Now, one interesting little aside on this is in the back, it has this section. It says, asking me all sorts of, this has some notes from his original notes in here, and it ends asking me all sorts of questions I cannot answer. Perhaps you can, then your child will. And it's signed the James. And then this is the part that some of you might find interesting. It's signed and it says Lookout Mountain, California. Now the astute viewer will know the significance of that. Lookout Mountain, back when this was originally published, this is originally from 1963. In 1963, no one would have understood the significance of Lookout Mountain. In fact, most people don't understand the significance of it now, but it was the largest film studio on the West Coast that was operated by the U.S. government, and it was a clandestine production studio for propaganda. So very interesting inclusion of that signing off there from Lookout Mountain makes one wonder. So now moving right along. Now this is where I'm going to get a little into the theological realm. This is probably the only one I'll get to. One more I think is probably worth reading with your older children, but this was definitely one you can read to, I would say, ages about 10 and up will appreciate that one. Now, this is Bible and War in America. And I talked about this the other night in a video about apocalyptic worldviews and how that's kind of taken over a lot of the evangelical movement and how to fight against it. And this was one of the books that I brought up. This is an excellent book about the Bible and war in America. And a biblical view of an American obsession and steps to recover liberty by Joel McDermott. And excellent book on the problems with a lot of the elevating like the special forces to like almost godlike status, like that guy's a Navy SEAL, and the way a lot of churches really hold up the military in high esteem in ways they should not, in ways that is very spiritually unhealthy. So excellent breakdown of that. And I think I include this because I think to have spiritually fit children need to be raised in a way to question their churches and question their governments in a healthy manner that where they don't just become rebels for the sake of rebels, but they learn to question the party line and say, why is this being told to me? And which goes back to this book right here. So anyway, now, as for the medical part, now we've seen more in the last 5 years of medical foolishness than I ever thought I would see in my lifetime. And this is an older book that's a little harder to get. This is Murder by Injection by Eustace Mullins, and he is a fairly controversial guy. But don't let that scare you off. This is all about the perversion of the medical industry and how things like the American Heart Association and institutions like that are used to steer the health industry into what it is today. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff about that, because I know I grew up with this mentality when I was younger of holding doctors up on this pedestal as though doctors were just, again, the trust the science kind of logic that, well, a doctor said it. And if the family doctor says it and they tell your parents, then it becomes gospel. And looking back now in my childhood, we had a good family doctor. I liked the guy. My parents liked the guy. But again, he was held in such high regard as what he said was the equivalent to like gospel. And I think my parents would have done well to question some of that. And I think we don't realize doctors are very human. And this book right here has an excellent section I'm going to read on this, because this is a good jumping off point for murder by injection, is just this part right here. Chapter 8, the best science money can buy. Science has a face, a house, and a price. It is important to ask who is doing science, in what institutional context, and at what cost. Understanding such things can give us insight into why scientific tools are sharp for certain types of problems and dull for others. And that's a quote by Robert Proctor of the Cancer Wars. So anyway, but the murder by injection is a good eye-opening expose of the medical industry. And I am not opposed to doctors. I don't have a problem with, I'm not like a rabid, anti, I don't even want to say anything to get my channel dinged, but you get the idea. I'm not against medicine. I'm not against drugs, but ever since, I think it was in 1998 or so, when they legalized commercials for prescription drugs, radically changed the medical landscape. And around a couple of years later, I remember my ex-wife, she was a nurse when we first met, and she had several friends who were being recruited by these big drug companies that were basically almost borderline call girls, where they would go around and take doctors to lunch and get them into prescribing certain drugs. And I remember my now ex-wife was horrified by this and thought that was a horrible perversion of medicine to basically have these cute girls going in and trying to get doctors in kind of on the take with all these other incentives and lunches and travel plans and all kinds of stuff they do for them to get them to prescribe medications that otherwise nobody would take. So anyway, that's a great book about, and there's a few others in my library that I might come back if there's interest and do more of that, because that whole thing of questioning modern medicine, I think, is really important, because it's really tempting for a lot of people to elevate certain personalities and certain professions on a pedestal and take what they say as some kind of gospel and not question it when we should. So now moving right along. Now this goes right into the whole television thing. This is kind of a dry, very much not as fun of a read as Toxic Sludge is Good for You or some of that, but a fascinating study nonetheless. I would only get this if you're hardcore, but this is Television and Antisocial Behavior by Milgram and Shotland. And Milgram is, of course, the Milgram of the Milgram. Somebody else referenced the other experiment he's famous for. And this is from 1973. And what this is about, and I mainly picked this out because I always like the original source material anytime I can, because this is the kind of book that books like this cite a lot. And it's kind of nice to sometimes just go straight to the tree and get the fruit yourself instead of letting someone pick it and explain it to you. So Television and Antisocial Behavior is all about the influence that television has on the general public. And books like this will really make you want to throw your television set out completely and divorce yourself completely from broadcast television, because one of the things you realize, and this is, obviously it's important if you have children, but also just for yourself, because one of the things that television and media does is it can put ideas into your head that didn't exist before. And that's the whole point of this book, was that what they were testing was to see if an antisocial behavior that was shown in a film, if it would be adopted by the people who watched the film. So what they did was they had a little donation box, one of those, you've probably seen these before, little plexiglass boxes that are sometimes by cash registers and stuff, and like give to such and such charity, and it'll be just like a clear plexiglass box you can put money in. And in the film they filmed the movie was made 3 different ways. Where one way the person in the movie is doing this in a bad way. They break open the boxes, and steal the money, and they get caught and punished and everything else. Then there's one where they get away with it, and I think there's one under slightly different circumstances, but all 3 versions show the same thing in different contexts of not necessarily a good context, but sometimes like a neutral or overtly bad. But either way, they all present the same behavior of this person saw this box and they broke it open and took all the money. So the people participating in the study didn't realize that part of the study was when they went to pick up their check as for participating in this deal. And one of the things they did was watch this film. They go to this office to collect their check for participating in the study, and the office is deliberately closed to cause frustration. And so when they show up, there's no one there, but there's this donation box that looks just like or similar to the one in the movie, and it's got money in it. And so the temptation there is obvious, and they've been given this idea. And I think one of the films didn't have this in it. So they wanted to see how many people faced with these same circumstances would imitate that behavior. And lo and behold, even the people who watched the film where it's portrayed in a very negative light, a lot of them still took advantage of that situation and broke it open and didn't. Whereas the people who had never seen this, where they didn't see that in the film, that idea wasn't put into their head. So that they didn't consider that as an option of behavior. And what you're left with when you read this, and again, fairly dry reading, but very important, is you see the point of the authors is that if television can introduce concepts and introduce ideas and behaviors that you never would have thought of before. So there are certain antisocial behaviors and all kinds of other destructive behaviors that you may not have ever thought about had you not watched a movie that contained that behavior. And I think if you sit and think about that, you start realizing how that has probably personally affected you in ways that you didn't even realize. And studies like this, you can look at these 2 ways. One is as a cautionary tale, which is how I think most of us would look at that. But then you start realizing when you read books like this, you start realizing the public relations industry, they look at that totally different. They see that as you could seed these audiences and different parts of the general public to behave certain ways by putting those things into programming. And you start to see how malleable the human condition is and why you need to be very careful about your intake of what we watch. Now, this is definitely one that I know some of you, somebody brought it up again in the comment section the other day. This is Dumbing Us Down. I don't know how well you can read that cover there, but this is Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling by John Taylor Gatto. An excellent book. And he's written several books. This is probably the quickest read of them all. This one is about 100 and a little less than 120 pages or so, but excellent book about the education system. And this is one I really wish my parents had read before I went off to public school, because this really helps you understand there's a lot of things about public school that serve no other purpose than to train you to be a compliant to authority and a compliant worker. And I'm not saying that, again, that we all just become rebels for the sake of being rebels, but there's a level of compliance. And again, if you're watching this channel, you know what I'm talking about. There is a level of compliance that's common now that is downright terrifying. People who regurgitate without any personal amendments all the information they see on television becomes their identity. They have no real substance beyond what they took in. And one of the things you start realizing too is a lot of the people that when I was younger I thought were really smart, I'm not saying they're stupid now, but you start realizing what schooling, public school, is really measuring compliance. So a lot of the people that I thought in my youth were really smart people were actually people who were more in tune to what their authority figures expected, and so they were able to give that back to them. So they were very good in their compliance, not necessarily their critical thought. And one of the things that Mr. Gatto does here is shows the history of modern education, that this isn't just some crazy theory that he has, that this is the deliberate purpose of the modern education system, is to create compliant workers and people who don't critically think. Because what he points out is around the I think it was around the 20s or so, they started realizing we're making people too smart. So the big robber baron types stepped in and said, we need to dumb everybody down. And one of the examples he gives of this, which I think is a great litmus test for this, is look at a math test or look at the writing level of someone in 1910 and look at what they were capable of in high school math and look at their literacy and what they were writing in their compositions. And it is light years ahead of where we're at now. And as he points out, rightfully so, that there is no rational reason for that. There's no reason that we should be moving backwards in literacy and math and all these things that we have lost capacity for critical thought. All that should be advancing. So there's literally no reason to go backwards in math and reading. And other things as well. But those are the two most obvious things, that you could pick up a math book written in the early 1900s, and chances are some of that math at the high school level is going to be very challenging to you now, even if you have a college degree. So anyway, that is dumbing us down. Excellent book, and that really helps you even if you can't avoid public school. And I've got one daughter that is homeschooled now, and I wish we had figured this out sooner. But even if you do, if you have to just hold your nose and go to public school, at least you have a better understanding of what you are. If you are the one in public school, you have a better understanding of what you're dealing with. And if you're a parent, you have a better understanding of what is actually being measured in your child's behavior. And then that makes it a lot easier to realize, maybe little Billy is doing fine, and I just need to back off and let him, there's things that the school is being stupid about that they can just go pound sand. Now, this is where things get a little weirder, a little more esoteric, as it were. This is the Franklin scandal. Now, definitely not a book that I would say, hey kids, gather around, let's read about the Finders case. This is a very long read, but fascinating piece of American history. And I mainly include this because this is by Nick Bryant, and I believe this was originally published in 2007. Let me just see. But he wrote it about almost 20 years or so, about 20 years after, from 2009. So it's about 20 years after the Franklin scandal happened. And I mainly include this from a parent perspective because this is all about children being lured into child prostitution scandals. Now, a lot of these children were lured away from group homes, foster homes, Boys Town, but still, as a parent, it is really good to understand how vulnerable your child can be to those things and be vigilant against those things, and just being aware of that. All of us can be caught up in that. And the case of Alicia Owens is a great example. She was one of the teenagers caught up in that, who started out as just a regular rebellious teen and wound up embroiled in some crazy stuff and thankfully she is pulled out of that all now and is one of the people out there helping spread the truth about that. But like I said, I mainly put that not so much for the broader thing about the Franklin scandal, but more just the specifics of understanding that there are people out there who will exploit your children if you let them. And there are very twisted people who that is a game to them. And if they feel like they can get to your children, they will. So being aware of that will definitely help you out. Now, this one is going to be probably the most controversial because I think this actually belonged to my grandfather. This is the New Testament and Psalms, and I just grabbed this off my shelf. I have a whole shelf of different types of Bibles, but I grabbed this just as an example of having, and I mainly say this, I am a Christian, and I take my Christianity very seriously, and the more I have gotten into all of this stuff, the more my faith has grown, and the more I wouldn't be here without my faith. And so it's so funny sometimes when people are like, oh yeah, dude, you woke up to all this stuff, but you're still getting suckered by the Christianity. And not the case at all. In fact, that is what drives my passion for all this and my search for truth. And as I mentioned in my video about the apocalyptic stuff, that when I started really researching into things about Christianity and war, that put me at a very difficult place where I realized studying this might challenge my faith. And thankfully, when I started reading my Bible for myself without someone telling me how to interpret it, I realized like a lot of the things that I took for granted were not things that were actually, coming from the Bible. But I say this mainly as having a good spiritual center for your life and for your children's life is, I cannot stress that enough. Having a good spiritual base in your life will help you deal with all the other stuff a lot better. And again, that's one, I know I'll get flack for it, but hey, the proof is in the pudding, and I've been through a lot, and that is what has kept me on an even course, and helped me through a lot of things like my divorce and lots of trials in my life. Now, my last one, this we'll get back to a little lighter here. This is one, if you have older children, this is one you could turn them loose with, like teenagers and such. This is Secrets and Lies: Exposing the World of Cover-Ups and Deception by David Southwell. And I believe this is a British author. I think this is, but it's almost a conspiracy picture book, but it is great. It's lots of good stuff in here about, let me see if I can find just articles on, one of the things I always do when I've got a book like this, of compilation of conspiracies, is I look and see if it has anything on like Israel. Because Israel is one of those things that when you're dealing with people who think Israel is actually a spiritual, God-breathed nation that is above criticism, that leads to some serious problems with behavior, and you wind up finding yourself excusing a lot of stuff you would never tolerate. So I'm always curious where an author stands on Israel, because you can use that to kind of gauge a lot of other things. And he actually talks about the USS Liberty and quite a few things in here. So excellent. This is almost like a primer of conspiracy material, and shockingly goes into some fairly dark places about that. So this is one that I picked up really I was at Half Price Books and saw this one, and I really wasn't expecting much, but I flipped through, I saw a few of the articles, and I was like, okay, I'm sold. And these are always a good jumping off point, especially for your kids, where, reading a kind of Cliff Notes version of some of these historical events, and then you start seeing, there's way more to this than I originally thought. So, again, kind of a jumping off point for that. So there you go. So I hope that those of you, the one of you that was saying that, and I hope some others of you got something out of that. And again, I can't stress this enough. If nothing else, go find this book, or you can probably read this short story online. This is definitely, if you have children, this is a must read, because just The way this is done is brilliant, and it really helps. Again, I would say a kid younger than 10 might have a little harder time understanding where it's really coming from, but really helps kids see the way propaganda can work. And it was kind of funny years later, like I said, I read this in 87, I think, or 87 or 88, and it had stuck with me. I remember this story in my head long after. And I remember seeing an episode of Barney in the early 90s that was very reminiscent of this, but not in a good way. It was almost doing what they were doing in this, where this worm had eaten the pages of some of the books. So the kids had to rewrite history, or they had to rewrite these stories. And I was like, holy cow, this is like a children's story, or the children's story. So anyway, I'll stop there. I hope that was helpful. And I've got some more other lists. And somebody else was asking in a comment section about if I take book suggestions. And the short answer to that is yes, of course I do. But I do have to be, I'm definitely suggest whatever books you want to suggest. Just know that I'm kind of at that point where I've got so much to read. I'm juggling things around all the time, trying to make time for new books. So it's just what I can get done and still earn a paycheck at my day job. So anyway, thanks for watching. And again, at the end of this, on the end screen, I'll put up some links to the Toxic Sludge is Good For You and some of the other books if you want to get a little deeper dive on that. So thanks for watching.